Welcome back to the Family on 3 podcast, where we explore the importance of community, the value of authentic leadership, and what it means to be a good teammate. Today we are joined by a guy who has become synonymous with the sport of lacrosse over the last 2 decades. From his high school playing days in the tradition-rich area of Yorktown, New York, to his All-American and national championship career for the Syracuse Orangemen, to his work now with ESPN on the sidelines for both football and lacrosse, Paul Carcaterra has become one of the great storytellers in the sport of lacrosse. Today we explore the people that got him where he is, the experiences that have shaped his way, and what Paul sees as the value of being a great teammate. So let's bring it in, huddle up, episode 4 with Paul Carcaterra.
Family on 3, 1, 2, 3. Family.
All right, Paul. So as someone that's that's clearly a great storyteller, your passion, your energy is infectious through all the projects that you do, be it the Overtime podcast, the Relaxin' series, which I don't know if I like better in the car or the barbershop. I'm real impressed that people hop in the barber's chair, but seeing the cuts, actually I told a buddy that I was doing this conversation with you. He asked if you'd come out to Hilliard, Ohio and give him a haircut. But with someone that's a great storyteller, one of the things that I've found is if you look on people's social media, they usually tell their stories through that. That's kind of become the modern storybook. And looking through yours, one of the things that really stands out to me were 3 elements that seem like they're just huge to you, which is your family, your craft, and the sport of lacrosse.
Yeah.
So kind of using that as a backdrop, there was one specific picture I wanted to start the conversation off with that really stood out to me. There was a picture that you posted of your brother at U.S. Lacrosse headquarters, sitting on the brick wall next to a plaque commemorating your mother, Diane.
Yeah.
That I'm a former fundraiser. But the post itself, there was so much about it that speaks to community and lacrosse. And I want to make sure I get exactly what the plaque said exactly right. So it says her love of lacrosse was all about the support of her children, the friends she met, and the good times she had on the road.
Yeah.
So using that post as kind of a backdrop, and your brother's IG handle of Yorktown Hopkins Lacrosse.
Yeah, it says enough.
Well. But taking all those elements in, go back in time a little and describe how all those components kind of captured in that picture have shaped you to where you are now.
You know, that's a great point, and it's very touching and honed in, if that makes any sense, in regards to how you were able to pick that out, because that really was the way we were raised. I mean, my parents grew up in New York City. My mother was actually born in England. Both of her parents are 100% Irish. So she came over as an immigrant. My dad's an Italian guy from New York City who was born and bred in the city. And when they came up to Yorktown, which is about 40 miles north of New York City, they had no clue they were moving into this town that was like a rabid lacrosse town. And I say it all the time, it's like it's really the closest thing to like a Canadian hockey town or an Indiana basketball town. It's infectious. I mean, the culture and the community always rallies around lacrosse. So my parents were entrenched in that community. They were not athletes growing up. So in terms of the X's and O's, I mean, my mother obviously has passed and she's been gone for 6 years. My father is 72 years old, has been to hundreds of lacrosse games. But if you were to ask them the X's and O's and the specifics of a game, no clue. And that was actually a gift, because for us, they wanted to just support us and be there for our passion. Whether if that was baseball we decided to do or if it was playing the piano, that's just the way my parents were. I mean, my dad used to drive up to Syracuse and come to all my games. And honestly, like deep down inside, like I knew he wasn't like the other parents in terms of watching the game or like taking my stats. I mean, I could have 5 goals in a game, or I could have 0 goals in a game and shoot 0 for 12. The message was always the same. It was like, hey, great job. What do you want to go out to do in terms of eating? Like, are you hungry? And he's an Italian guy. He talks about food all the time. So, like, that was kind of the way we were raised and the way that we grew up. So I think it was, like, the greatest gift they could have given us. I mean, my older brother, Steve, went to Towson, and he played lacrosse there. Was a really strong player. My younger brother, Brian, at Johns Hopkins, he was the national goalie of the year. And I probably put the most pressure on him in terms of like reliving the games because I was older than him and I was 3 years removed when he was a senior in college. So I went to every single one of his games. He prepared for games or anything. It wasn't important to them. It was being around the community. And, my mom was a really interesting person. Really did get too concerned about anything. I mean, I remember when I was like 16, 17 years old, fresh off of getting my driver's license, I smacked into another car. It was a decent accident. No one got hurt, knock on wood. But I came home and the car was pretty banged up. And I come home and I'm crying. And I'm like, I can't believe this. And my grandmother, Bridie, who was from Ireland, like tireless worker, saved up so much money and like was the most generous person ever. Like she bought us a brand new truck when we were like 16 years old that we could pass down to Brian when eventually he got older. And it was just a beautiful thing. And like I felt that like guilt of like my grandma's hard work and me smacking the car. And my mom walks out and she's like, I can't even tell. Nothing's wrong with it. And like honestly, it was pretty banged up. So that was kind of the mindset she had with us with athletics, and my dad too. Like they never ever questioned anything we did. They never really got too in tune with like the way the game was played or how it was played. And I look at that as a gift. I mean, because it allowed us to find our own passion. It allowed us to really carve our own path in regards to like wanting to be great in sport. There was no extrinsic type of motivation. It was all from within. And as a parent, I have to remind myself sometimes too. I mean, I have 2 kids and a 12-year-old boy, and he's on the spectrum and he's autistic, so he's not going to be playing lacrosse at Syracuse. And I do have a daughter who's just turned 10, and she's honestly pretty talented with her stick, and she's a good little player. Now she's never played in games, and who knows what her career is going to be like. But she's talented now. But I try to like keep my mom in the back of my mind and keep it fun. So even though I know a lot about the sport, I'm trying to like almost play mind games with myself and my daughter, so we always keep it that way, if it makes sense.
No, it makes it makes perfect sense. And I mean, there's so much there that you just said that's awesome. And I think as people listen, and people know you as a lot of people know you as the guy on ESPN. I mean, that's on the field, and we see you in that capacity. But it's, as you talked about, it's, to me, the fascinating part is how people get there. Where does your passion come from? Where does your perspective come from? And one of the things as you talk about your kids, the interesting balance of, having your daughter she's better than pretty good. Seeing the pictures, seeing the videos, my 8-year-old was like, I got to go pass behind my back like Pela. And I was like, okay. Yeah. So we went on the read. It didn't work out like that. But I think as that shapes who you are today, one of the things that I find fascinating is, you mentioned the challenge of having kids who enjoy doing what you've done at a very high level. So in your case, lacrosse. But the other thing is you, again, as I learned more just through pictures and videos kind of about your passion for your kids, a couple things jumped out to me. One is they are insane on the mountain. So we're going to get into that in a second, where that came from. Because, having friends that love the snow and skiing and snowboarding, like there's a passion to that practice. But there was another post that you had put up of a picture of them that you started to speak to that I want to dive into a little bit more, which was they made a sign, and I won't say what your 2 kids were doing in the picture, but it said, "Thanks for teaching us to enjoy the simple things in life."
Yeah.
And I read it, and I laughed just at the thought of, I have 3 daughters, 4, 6, and 8 myself, and the simple things in life change. Right now, the simple things in life are these 15 minutes of silence. But I thought it spoke volumes to the approach that you're taking with them, because to have kids that are reflective is awesome, but to have kids that appreciate those lessons, I think obviously it comes from your background, your parents, but talk a little bit about how you take that approach with them, be it on the lacrosse field or definitely on the mountain, and how you instill that idea of the simple things are the awesome things.
To me, it was really important to find something from a family perspective that we could all do together. So when I was growing up, I went skiing like once. And I'll never forget, my dad and mom took us to like Hunter Mountain, where everyone from New York City goes, and like people are skiing in like jeans and giant jackets, right? So like that was my first experience with regards to skiing. When I was in college, Roy Colsey and I are both from Yorktown, and he went to Syracuse as well. It was crazy as it sounds, but like we started snowboarding during the winter breaks, and like I've had an aggressive approach towards snowboarding, and I love it too because like lacrosse was such a big part of my life growing up, and it's something I identified with. And when I first started off snowboarding, it was like something that I really had to prove to myself I could get good at. And, you know, like I'm 44 years old now, and you know I have my limitations athletically compared to like an 18 or 19-year-old, but like I self-taught and really enjoyed snowboarding to the standpoint that it's been a driving force for me in terms of like the way my head spins when the calendar turns and the seasons. So when I was dating my wife, who I met at Syracuse, and she was a swimmer there, she wasn't really snowboarding much, but then afterwards she started snowboarding and she got pretty good. And then when we had kids, like Grayson was 3 years old. He's never been on skis in his life. I mean, and that's like against the norm. Everyone says you should teach a kid how to ski first, and never. My kids have never been on skis, and they started when they were 3. And there were some real struggles in terms of like, you know, I had to soak up a couple of ski seasons in terms of just teaching them. But I always did a trip or two on my own. I'm not gonna lie to you. But what that allowed me to do also is like little things. Like when I was teaching Grayson how to snowboard, I started teaching myself other things. Like, I mean, I don't know how much you know about snowboarding, but every time I was teaching him on smaller hills, I taught myself how to ride switch. So, you know, now a blessing of teaching Grayson all those years was me learning how to ride switch. So I ride switch in regular pretty much at the same level now. And you know, same with Payla. When she was 3, she started snowboarding, and I would peel off with Grayson, and my wife and I would kind of like take turns. Like one of us was with the younger one teaching, and the other was with the older one riding the mountain. So by the time they were like 4 and a half, they were riding the entire mountain. And it's been a blessing, because as much as I wanted to teach them something and a life skill that they'll have forever, because I can do this until however old I am. It's like golf, you know? So I think it was really important for me to teach them a skill that they could have outside of team sports, but also selfishly something we can enjoy as a family. Like when we go to all of these places, it's really, really special from, you know, just from the perspective of riding the chairlift. And, you know, not every day is rosy. Let me tell you, like, you know, there's some days getting the equipment on, and, you know, this one loses her glove and this one forgot the goggles, and we have to turn around. There's some nightmares. I'm not gonna lie to you. It's not all
Yeah.
peaches and cream, but I feel like it's provided an amazing opportunity for my family, specifically with my son too. As I mentioned, with his special needs, like it's something that he's really, really good at. Team sports just too overwhelming for him with all the moving parts. And he really like allows himself to get caught in the moment. It's the same reason, like during this quarantine, about 3 days a week, I'll do workouts with him in the basement. They're like high intensity training things, and he does some of them. And the other days, 3 days a week, for a total of 6, and we take Sunday off, I'll go on long runs and he'll ride his bike. And like, that's another opportunity for him to kind of unwind and not use his brain, because his brain spins out of control. So it's really checked off a lot of boxes for us. Like the snowboarding's been a passion. It's been a family activity, and it's been an escape for Grayson.
I love that. I love the passion piece about it, especially because I think it comes across, to be honest, just in how you share those videos, those stories. Your pride in your kids comes out in that.
Yeah, I love it.
And it's crystal clear. And I think that again, as a parent myself, I get that. I think that that's awesome. And with my kids and my wife and I talk about all the time, like, what are those things we can do? Like you said, what are those experiences we can have, all 5 of us? And that's not easy. I mean, there's not a lot of things out there that adults down to 4-year-olds can do. And you know, you've obviously found that.
Yeah. The other piece of it too. Yeah. But the other piece of it too is like, it was it was a really interesting conversation I had with my daughter about a year ago. She's gotten really good at snowboarding to the point where, like, when we're out west, I mean, when she was 8 and 9, now she's 10. She even at that level of the locals, like, she can really rip and go. So people have asked us, about her, and if she wants to, become part of like these snowboard teams and the ski teams out west at places like Park City, and I ran it by her one time, and we've even thought about moving out there. But like, she can be a free rider and just have fun the rest of her life, and never go into a competition. There'll be plenty of opportunities for her to compete, whether it's lacrosse or other things like that. If snowboarding is the thing that she wants to kind of just have like an artistic approach to it and not have to worry about anything, or waking up and meeting a coach at 7:30, I think in life you kind of need some of those things.
No, absolutely. I think the balance piece, the outlet piece, what is it? For me, I joke, like, for me, it is golf, but I don't like, selfishly, I like to golf by myself.
Yeah.
I couldn't survive on a set of skis longer than about 30 seconds, but golf is that thing. There's something about it that's just competitive enough that I can compete with myself to keep my interest. But there's almost for lack of a better term, like a loneliness to it that's actually great. You're isolated.
Yeah.
It's you in your own head, but doing something you love to do, which I think is cool. And for kids to have that early is something special. Absolutely. But one thing that you said earlier on when you talked about snowboarding that I thought was fascinating was teaching your kids to teach yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that shifting a little bit, kind of lacrosse, but with your background, like, I guess all the greatest coaches would tell you that they become better coaches as they coach better players, because they just force them to be better and better and better at their craft. And I mean, you had the luxury to play for one of, you would maybe argue, the all-time greatest. So rewinding back to Syracuse and Coach Simmons, when one of the things we talked about beforehand that I love is this idea of authentic leadership. And so many people know him, obviously success on the scoreboard and the record books and all of that, but he had the chance to coach some of the greatest players to ever play the game. And take us inside the office, away from the lights of the dome, away from the championship trophies. What was it about Coach Simmons? And maybe it was the fact that he coached so many great players that made him great. But what was it about him and his style of leadership that impacted you and your teammates the most?
Yeah, I mean, for him, he's so unique, and he's a unicorn, not only in the sport of lacrosse, but like when I'm around coaches in general, whether it's covering college football through ESPN or doing other assignments and meeting leaders and coaches, he's a unicorn because he's an artist. Like, he's a sculptor, and he's so open-minded in regards to his approach to everything, and it's never black and white with him. Like, he lives in the gray so much that I learned so many lessons in life from him. I mean, he's the ultimate. And when you go into the office and you talk to him, it was never really about lacrosse. Like, literally, you could see something on his desk and you would ask him a question about it, and then like 40 minutes later you were leaving, and like you didn't even really have an opportunity to talk about lacrosse. But as you got older, you knew, like, you weren't going into his office to talk X's and O's. Like, he was a guy in my 4 years. I've never felt more confident as a player than my senior year ever in my life due to him. But I've never been so unprepared to coach lacrosse because of him. And I say that in the highest regard and biggest compliment, because we spent very little time on like X's and O's and rides and clears and all the specialty things. Like, you have to be here. It was almost like he would come into a huddle and like, there's 6 of you. One of you needs to beat your man to get the defense to commit. You know what I mean? He'd say something like, I need 50 shots today, 50 shots. And like, honestly, 50 shots is gold. I mean, most teams, shoot in the 30% range. So if you take 50 shots, I mean, do the math. You're scoring like 15 goals a game. So right. In the back of his mind, there's always 50 shots. Give me 50 shots. And you never were like yelled at when you tried something. I look at him and, prior to the Gates, he was still Roy Simmons Jr., the artist. But those guys changed the way that he interpreted lacrosse moving forward, whether he believes it or not. I'm sure he would say yes. I don't want to speak for him, but those guys made him have even more of an open mind in regards to like just how you use players. And like, people don't realize, but like the Gates were on like almost every wing of a face-off. And that was a time where like there were 6 poles on the field a lot of times, right? Let's be honest, prior to the Gates, excuse me, no one was playing that way. I mean, you had great talents, don't get me wrong. There's been talented lacrosse players for forever. But stylistically, no one played like those two. And that fueled the generation of the Powells, which fueled the generation of the Thompsons. And you've never seen lacrosse like it is now in terms of just like the way people play and how creative they are with wraparound shots and behind the backs and all of that. But the fact of the matter is there's so many players out there now that if they played for Roy Simmons Jr., you'd see even crazier stuff. Just because, stick technology and the way athletes are and strength and conditioning. And there's so many variables to all that he didn't have, and you still saw that end product. So just imagine the way that the game would be played if he was still coaching. But I'll also say one last thing about him. He made you feel so confident. Like, and I have a part of me is always going to understand like what his motivation behind that was. It's like empowering people, and I try to empower people, whether they're younger people that I'm talking to and coaching just in a one-off situation, or if I stop by a practice or I talk to a team over Zoom or something. Like, empowering people, especially young people, is such a strong tool. And Roy Simmons Jr. did exactly that. Like, I can't tell you how you feel as a player, like when you're stretching and you're on the ground and the whole team's stretching and he comes up to you and, he whispers in your ear that you're going to dominate today. And, people are coming to watch you play. Like, do you know what that does to like a 20-year-old? I mean, most coaches are sitting there like, let's go. And you feel this gentle little rub on your shoulder and, he's whispering in your ear. I mean, that's how confidence can be bred. And for me, that's exactly what I needed. And I feel like that approach is the approach that I try to take pieces of him and pieces of my mom and my dad and all of that, and just be cognizant of the fact that like people want to feel like you believe in them. And that's the common denominator with those 3 people that I mentioned. Like they believed in me, they believed in people. I've always felt like if I have information to give, like if it's a young broadcaster or if it's someone in our field, like honestly, I tell them everything. I don't really hold back in terms of like my secret traits or secret sauce or anything of that nature. And if I have something, I'm going to share it, because I feel like if you believe in that way of living, people will want to be with you, and your place in society will always be there. It'll be strong. No one's going to alienate people that have those kind of mindsets. Like, it's not about, like, for me ever, like, I'm not going to tell that person because I'm afraid that he might end up being better than me. Like, I don't live in that world.
That, I don't even know what to say after all that. As a coach, I think you're spot on. I think it's been lost. I think the idea of letting, for lack of a better term, letting the players play has been lost. I think that on a much more macro level, as a guy that reached out to you completely randomly and said, "Hey man, would you hop on my podcast?" And you got back within 30 minutes to say, "I'd be glad to." To everybody listening, I can tell you firsthand that you live exactly what you say. Your message there is grounded in Coach Simmons, is grounded in your mom, is grounded in your background, but is something that, I can say firsthand that you live, because otherwise we wouldn't be having this conversation. And I appreciate that. That's the easiest way to say it, is I just appreciate that, because more people need to be like that. not in
and
lacrosse, just in general.
yeah, no, and I appreciate that too. And, I'm going to be totally transparent too. Like, nobody's perfect, and you have to be vulnerable. And if you're not vulnerable, you're not going to grow. And like, I understand, like, it's so much easier to sit on a podcast and tell you that, like, I've got all the answers, or I always feel positive and attack the day and win the day. Yeah, of course I want to win the day. I want to attack the day. I do most times, but there are days where I don't. But as long as I have that mindset of like an upward trajectory in terms of how I want to live and how I want to give and what type of person I want to be, I feel like I'm going to be okay.
No, that's spot on. And I think it's, to anybody living in these times, especially, I think that having that, optimism's a word, having that outlook, I think is huge. I think you've been exposed to such a unique background. Specifically within lacrosse, but even in your current profession, you've had the opportunity to, play catch with Bill Belichick and interview Nick Saban. And, these are the titans of not just college football or professional football, but of leadership. These are the guys that have figured it out at, an elite level. And I think that what goes into that behind the scenes, what their story is, similar to talking to you today, would be fascinating. Every time I read about Nick Saban, it's not what I think it would be, in a very positive way, and I think that you've also had this awesome opportunity to share in moments. So much of what comes out of listening to you is the two words I think of are authentic and genuine, which kind of mean the same, but like there's a passion there that goes with that. And you've had an opportunity to live out some moments with other people, the two that come to mind. And one of them is why I reached out to you in the first place. The first one was interviewing Andy Shea after Yale won the national title, and he grabbed you by the shoulders. And you said, you don't have to apologize. It was such a rare moment of just raw, pure emotion that as a coach was just incredible to watch. But the other moment I want to ask you about, and just to, a 30-second reflection on what it felt like, because you'll remember, is on the field with being a Columbus guy. Coach Bresci means a lot to a lot of us here in Columbus, Ohio State. Michael, the whole deal. We all love the family, the man, the whole deal. I realized that the Maryland-Carolina national championship game was being re-aired. I turned it on. I fast-forwarded all the way to overtime because that's the kind of guy I am, and watched just the celebration. And it was a couple nights ago. I needed it because it was a rough day in quarantine land. And watching that and watching him with you, like, it was funny because I was like, Paul got to live this moment with Coach Bresci that was just unlike any other. And it was at that moment that I was like, I'm going to reach out to Paul, because you were so genuinely happy for Joe. And Joe is obviously just having that raw emotion. When you get to experience those things, and really it's with lacrosse, but it's not lacrosse. It's everything else that those guys put into it. What are those moments like for you to be able to share those moments with guys like Bresci and Shea and Lars and all those guys in those moments?
Yeah, they're emotional, and I think that is the foundation of all of this is emotion. And in my role, you have to be really sensitive to the fact that in those spots, when a team has accomplished the highest possible level out there in lacrosse, the national championship, I think that you need to throw everything out the door. You go in with a plan and in the back of your mind spinning on how you're going to approach things. But at the end of the day, never go in a different direction if you have something that's like gold or that moment's there. Like, I didn't know Andy Shea was going to grab me, but he's emotional. He's a good friend of mine. That's his way of him telling me, like, yo, man, I love you, buddy. Like that. Like, I understand that. So when he grabs me and he's saying, sorry, like, dude, that guy's brain, that guy, he's looking at the scoreboard. He's won a national championship. This has been on his mind every single day since he's picked up a whistle. Like, you have to respect that, like, this is his moment. but the sheer emotion at the last game of the year trumps everything. So, like, to me, you have to prioritize that. And these are some of my good friends too. I respect all these guys. I'm going to tell you, like, the one thing that if I had to do over in my career, I rolled the dice and hugged him back, because I think it shows just your humanity too. Yeah, it's my job to get through this interview and talk to him, but he's also a friend of mine, and I felt the pressure that he's lived in, and I understand the story of going back to Columbus and beating Notre Dame, and the whole rallying around Michael and the team understanding that they were playing for something bigger. That's the one thing. Like, I would have just probably hugged Bresci in the middle of that interview and just rolled the dice to see what would happen next. So we tease each other all the time. Like, the first thing I always do when I see Joe is I give him a hug.
I love that. I love that story, just because, again, like, when you watch it live, you don't notice that. But again, it's being in the moment.
Yeah.
What's going through your head? Because again, it's, as a fan, I mean, I watch those games as a fan. I watch those games as a coach. I watch those games as a player. And those different roles go in and out. You never watch those games as a broadcaster, but as a guy who's lived it as a player, and then that knows these guys so well, no matter what, you have an emotional attachment to it. So I just love, I love I keep using the word, but I love the passion that comes across, because you are genuinely happy for them. And they are obviously genuinely happy for the moment, but I truly believe they wouldn't want to be sharing that moment. You talk about Andy Shea, like, he didn't want to share that moment with just anyone. Yeah. And I think that the relationships you've built and the authenticity that you've brought to this profession and to what you do specifically within it allows those guys to have those really raw moments. You don't see that in every sport. You don't see that in basketball and football as much because of the community that we're in and the relationships that exist there.
Yeah, it's an amazing community, and the relationships are so different. And for me, it's really important too for them to trust me. And I feel like I've put myself in a situation where, if someone tells me something, or if I'm privy to something with a program, I never feel the drive or the ambition to, like, break news. That's not what I do. I haven't been put on this world to be the first to break news. Like, there's a lot of stories out there that I know are happening well before the news breaks. There's probably a couple going on in lacrosse right now, but, like, honestly, I don't do it. I don't do it because I feel I don't need to ever break trust with someone, is the first thing, which is the most important. But the second thing too is my place in this lacrosse world. And we need people to break news, and I applaud those people, and I think it's excellent. And I'm really happy that we have that in the sport, because we need that for sure. But that's just not me, and it doesn't mean it's bad. I think it's great. But I'm put on this lacrosse world in my current role to call games, to break down games, to create storylines within contests. But more importantly, I truly feel like I've been put on this lacrosse world to tell stories more than anything. And you can tell stories during a game. And that all comes back to, me being just a little kid that used to read all the magazines, and I would get my hands on all the team's media guides. So the stories in games, and the best ones, are the ones that come out that I never planned for. Maybe there's something that was said about an ex-player, and I literally could tell you, like, every national championship team for the last 30, 40 years. And the best players on North Carolina in the early 80s, or when they won in 86 and Joey Seibold hit a jump shot, and 87, Gary Gates scoring 5 goals against Cornell in his breakout party, right? Like, so there's so many moments that I lived that are part of me that can add to the storytelling, even within games. So my number one priority is to tell stories, whether it's over live action, and there's different ways to tell a story. It's a story that's taking place in the game now. There's the connection of old to new, and there's so many different variables or something.
Perfect. Because there's 2 more questions I want to ask you. The you posted in your on your Twitter again, because you just have great posts, a picture from the Michigan State locker room. And it says the one. Do you remember this?
Yeah. I think that was football probably 3-4 years ago. It might have had something to do with Jack Conklin.
So it says, the way the quote reads is, out of every 100 men, 10 shouldn't be there. 80 are just targets. 9 are the real fighters. And we are lucky to have them, for they make the battle. But the one is a warrior, and he will bring the others back. When you hear that quote and you think back on your lacrosse career, who is a guy, it doesn't matter if you played with them, you covered them, who is a guy that quote represents in the lacrosse world?
That's an unbelievable question. This isn't necessarily the best player of all time. He's the best player at his position of all time. I think the best player of all time is Gary Gait. I think he transcended the sport. But being the one is different to me. It's being at a level that is kind of separated from the pack, but it just has an instinct that no one else has. And I would honestly say the one for me as a player, and watching that person and the way that he handled himself for all those years. And there were so many magical coaching moments too. And he's obviously a big news story now because what's happened at Hopkins. But like, to me as a player, it was Dave Petramala. Like when he walked on the field, you just knew like he was the one. Like he was the guy that was gunning for everyone's top guy. And he had that mentality and that approach that he was not going to be denied. I mean, the guys behind him at Hopkins were so much better and more confident because of the way that he played and the way that he approached the game. Like he was going after you. And he was going to play like a relentless brand of lacrosse. But to be the one, it's so much more than just like your results and the type of player you are. It's the attitude, and it's like the fearlessness and the ferocity in your approach. And like when I saw him, I always thought of him as different. I mean, he was the only guy to neutralize Gary Gait consistently. Like, yeah, maybe a guy had a good game against Gait, but like time and time again, man, Petramala went after Gait, the greatest player of all time, the Michael Jordan of our sport. And you just knew like he flourished in those moments, but he also, he was able to seek those moments out too.
No, that's an awesome answer. And it's funny when I was writing that question for you and having just listened to your interview with Coach Petramala just a couple days ago, I had a gut instinct that you might say him based off of just listening to that conversation and how you approached him. And one of the things, and I forget where I read it, but talking about how he was at his best when he was playing against the best.
Yeah.
Coach Petramala as a player, I think what you just described also, at least from a distance, is who he is as a coach. It is that, that just relentless drive to, and as he said, to not necessarily to win, but to his relentless drive to help young men be better men.
Yeah.
And it is relentless. And I think the best ones on the field and with a whistle around their neck are relentless. In that
I mean, they're so demanding, and that pocket of coaches are typically the guys who want it ultimately like more than everyone else, right? Like the
Sure.
best of the best, the Petramalas, the Belichicks, the Sabins, and all these guys, like their want is so strong.
That makes sense. I like that. It seems like you have a strong connection to the UAlbany program. And I was going to ask, is one of the reasons, and I don't know, Coach Ma, do you feel like a similarity between their program and the Syracuse program you played for in philosophy and style and culture?
Yes. For sure. Well, Scott Mars from my hometown, so I've known him my whole life, and
Yep.
I grew up in his house. His younger brother Dave, who was a great player at Johns Hopkins, was one of my best friends. And Scott Mars' approach, he allows his players to create their own paintings on the canvas. Like the canvas is a lacrosse field, and I feel like he's able to do that, even if it means sacrificing winning. Like he believes in his players to the point where he's willing to sacrifice the W's if it allows a player to express himself at a different level. And I appreciate that too. I think he's a wonderful coach. I think he's a great offensive mind too. But I do see some similarities for sure in that program. He's done an amazing job. He's been there 20 years. He's been to the NCAA tournament 10 times. I can't tell you how many America East championships he's won. And he's done it with, let's be honest. I mean, when he took over, it was a Division III program transitioning to Division I. So, he didn't inherit a, University of Virginia or a Carolina team or a Syracuse, Maryland, or a Hopkins. I mean, he started that from the ground up without like a tradition, and without like the resources of a big conference and
Right.
the revenue sharing and all of that. So I applaud what he's done.
Yeah, and I think his approach has allowed us, similar to what you talked about with Coach Simmons, has allowed us to see players play in a way that has helped continue to revolutionize the game, for sure.
100%.
But the last question I have for everybody, I'm a huge believer in living life by the mantra of just being a good teammate, be it with my 3 kids and with our family or their classmates, be it with the players at Denison or any kids that I coach. I just think that, to be a good teammate is to understand, it's all bigger than you. And right now we're all on the same team, as we talked about a little bit before we hopped on. When I say the sentence, how do you finish this sentence? To be a good teammate is to
be a good teammate is to allow your teammates into your struggles and to embrace their struggles. I think in sports, a lot of times you try to paint a picture of you being this big, strong, independent, hard-thinking individual that can fight and battle through anything. And that's not the case. I mean, we all go through struggles. And, if you were to dissect the locker room and to understand what each and every person's going through, maybe there's something tough at home, or there's some health issues within a family, or, mom and dad are struggling on this front, brother is struggling on this front. Like, we all have a lot of issues. I think if you're a great teammate, you become vulnerable and allow people into your world in regards to what you're struggling with. And I think that will coincide with people having the mindset that they can turn to you. And the best team that you possibly could have, and the best teammates that you possibly could have, are the ones that you're there for them on a human level, and I think your best lacrosse in this case would come to fruition if you had like-minded people in that respect. It's so important, I think, to be vulnerable and not to live like a false image. I think in sports, and I think we all need to do it in life too. It's like, we have to be willing to understand that we have struggles, but those struggles can be turned into some really positive things in life. Like, I look at my own life, and, my son being 12 and being on the spectrum, and, really struggles academically. He's got a 1.18 in school, and, there's a lot of things that are hard for him in a day. I mean, everyone loves him at school. It's Grayson. He's funny, and they wave to him and stuff. But, he doesn't go on, play dates like other kids. And, our family is really all he has. So as a parent, I'm not going to lie to you. I have some hard moments with that. And, I get sad and I get emotional. And I've become very transparent about that. And I'll tell anyone about that, because I think it's important for people to understand that, you can tell people how you feel. And someone could say, why would he go out and tell that to just people that he doesn't even know? Or why would he go on a podcast and say that? And my answer would be, because there's someone else that's struggling in life, that fights through things and has ups and downs. But I'll tell you, also those struggles can be like the greatest gifts. Internally, I'm not rattled ever. And I feel like I'm prepared and I'm ready for these moments because of the life I live, because I struggle in certain days of my life. I fight through certain things, and it's not always easy, but it's given me a wonderful perspective on the back end, if that makes any sense.
It makes probably more sense than you can imagine, and it makes more sense to more people than they would ever admit. And you talk about your son. My sister has a daughter with cerebral palsy. She's going to listen to this and listen to your message, and it's going to hit home like you wouldn't believe. As you were talking about it, I was thinking about her getting a little choked up, because perspective and opportunity and all those things come in different shapes and sizes. But I think your authenticity and your honesty is huge, not for the sport of lacrosse, but you have a platform, you have an audience, and you use it for wonderful things. So I want to thank you for taking the time. Again, like you said, there's so many ways to dissect this conversation, but for me, the things that come out of it are your willingness to help others, your willingness to share your knowledge and your experiences if you feel like that's gonna be of benefit to the greater good, or to someone that's coming along trying to do something like you. And not as many people are wired like that as should be. But I just want you to know that there's a lot of people out there that appreciate it. I said it to you after you interviewed Coach Petramala, that you give people a platform to be honest and open. And I wanted to flip the script and give you an opportunity to be on the receiving end of some questions, and be the honest and open one. So I appreciate the time. I really do. And stay safe. Stay safe through these trying times, man.
Well, thank you. It means a lot to me. It's always wonderful for me to kind of reflect and to think about my life too. And, the journey and all of that too allows me to kind of put things in perspective of what's next for me too, because oftentimes if you don't take the time to reflect and to understand what you're going through or your journey, sometimes you lack clarity for what that next stage is. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today, and it's good, man. It's good. It allows us all to understand that we are all in this together too, and I think that kind of reigns true in conversations like this. So thank you very much.